Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amor de Soi Wellness. And Donovan Jensen is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. And today we are talking about minimalism. So, Donovan, what are your initial thoughts when it comes to minimalism?
So minimalism is sort of a concept that has always come fairly naturally to me in the sense of I have never had super strong desires for a lot of material objects. I have found, however, as like through a period of time in my life where I was moving a lot and getting rid of a lot of things, like down to the point I just had a few things in my car that you really don't need much at all in terms of specific belongings to have sort of happiness, right? Like they don't necessarily add a whole lot to you. Now, you do definitely need like the ability to access certain things, right? Like if you don't have access to food and shelter and like some of those basic things, then like that kind of material item can impact happiness quite a bit.
Definitely.
But as far as specifically like a certain car, a certain phone, a certain whatever, those things don't seem to have nearly as much impact. I'd be curious what your thoughts are on minimalism.
Yeah, I think it's for me, I think it's like a constant state of practice. It's like it's something I personally like to strive for, but I don't always feel like I perfectly achieve it, given that I have some clutter, things I could definitely get rid of, some closets to clear out, but it's definitely, I think I share the same value of value experiences over stuff. And I just had my birthday last week, and I always tell people like I'd rather have experiences than more stuff. I don't need more stuff, but I do like, I think I've also moved multiple times, and that's really helped me downsize, and it always feels like a cleansing experience and it feels good. But I think the longer I've been where I've lived for 4 years now, and you just gradually accumulate more stuff. And so there's some closets that really need to be downsized. And usually that happens from me moving, but I'm not planning to move anytime soon. So it's one of those things that I'm kind of like, I want to, but I struggle with the getting started with that process. So I've actually have an accountability buddy, which is my brother, where we started this with just one room. Like I decluttered my office with his support, because it was like, sometimes it's hard because there's like things you're like, oh, there's an emotional tie in getting rid of this. And it's like, even though I don't use it, it's hard to get rid of it. And so I did the same thing for him when he was going through his stuff, because it's like sometimes when there's like sentimental value, it's harder to get rid of. But I do look at like, and it's not to say you can't keep any of that stuff, but it's also looking at like the functionality of the things you own matters too.
So one quick point, and then I have a question for you,
Yeah.
which is one of the things that I've heard in my various wanderings around of minimalism information is like one way to get around some of that stuff, or potentially downsize still if you want to, is to like take a picture of the thing, because it depends on what it is. But for a lot of those types of objects, the meaning is in sort of like being prompted to remember some like set of memories.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's something that some people do in that case. Totally different question, which is, I think people are probably pretty familiar with the idea of like being a materialistic person. Like that's an idea that makes sense. But I'd be curious what your definition is of minimalism, or what do you mean when you talk about it? Because I feel like there's a couple different ways that people can sort of mean it or like interpret it.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of like a practice in a way. It's not like you're minimalistic, or, well, no, I mean, there are some people that I would definitely classify as minimalist for sure, that are just like maybe living in their tiny house and just have like a handful of clothing items and just live in really minimalistically. For me, though, it's like an idea I want to have, but I'm not quite there. It's like I want to get there, but I think I achieve it in some aspects and probably not in others. So, and it doesn't have to do necessarily with stuff. It's like I think about my desktop on my computer, for example. That's not really like it's taking space in my computer, but it can get like accumulatively messy over time as I like put a lot of stuff on my desktop to remember it, and then it gets like really jumbled. So I have to go and like same thing with my emails. I gotta go in and clear them out, unsubscribe to all the junk things that I'm subscribed to. It just like it's a constant like process of trying to cut things out, like only have the essentials. And it's like an ongoing thing for me versus I think maybe there's just people that are more masterful at it than I am to others. So I'm like, if there was like a scale of minimalism to materialistic, I'm like, I don't even know if I'm like in the middle. I want to be like closer to the minimalistic side is where I strive. But I mean, I guess it's all relative too, you know. I don't have a lot of stuff in comparison to a person who has like a mansion and like a ridiculous amount of stuff, or hoarders doing way better than hoarders. I'm not a hoarder for sure. So yeah, I think it's relative too.
Yeah, I kind of agree, fall somewhat in the same camp. The way that I sort of frame it or think about it, and for myself anyway, is minimalism is sort of this ideal of having just the things that I either need or that I'm actively using or that bring me happiness. Like those are the only things that I should possess.
Right.
And so as part of that, I think you've kind of alluded to this, like I try to, when I find stuff that I'm not using, get rid of it. And that sounds really simple, but it is actually not something that I feel like comes naturally to a lot of people. Like for me, the part of obtaining things, like I don't buy things very often. I don't desire to like accumulate things.
Right.
It's a little harder for me on the getting rid of things side, right? When I like, for example, I know for a fact there's a pair of headphones in a crate by my feet right now that I'm not going to use because they don't work. I haven't used them for like 5 or 6 years. I don't know why those aren't in the trash right now. Like, or donated somewhere that they can fix them and someone else can use them.
Right.
Those are the kinds of things that like for me embody minimalism, right? Like when I'm practicing it, I would get rid of those because there's no reason for me to keep that in my house.
Right. Yeah, agree. I definitely think it's a practice, and you have to like make a mental. When I was decluttering my office, I had to go through each item and like mentally like it's an emotional process too, because it's like I came across some like binders from school notes that are really important, and I'm like, but have I opened it in 5 years? And I haven't, but I'm like, what if I need it at some point later? And so you have to go through that kind of emotional journey. And so it's like helpful to have someone hold your hand in the process and be like, have you actually used this in the last year? And then that's usually my standard with clothes, with stuff. It's like, have I actually utilized this in the past year? And it's sometimes really hard when it's not something you've used recently, but you're like, oh, but I may use this in the future. And that kind of is what trips me up sometimes.
Yeah, like the tote of Halloween costumes that I'm never going to wear again because I'm never going to want to be something that I've already been.
Too. Yeah. And I'm like, do I even fit in any of those? No. Yeah.
Yeah. Here's another note. I'd be curious for you, what sort of, when you are able to practice minimalism, what sort of benefits do you feel like you get?
Oh, the huge benefit is just feeling like whenever I clean and declutter and get rid of stuff, it just feels like it's physical stuff you're removing from your house, but it's like it does feel like an emotional weight that's like being released. You feel like lighter, in my opinion. I feel lighter. I just feel freer. I feel more comfortable in my space because it's cleaner. And that's actually something, even though I don't necessarily always like cleaning, I know when I do it, I enjoy the rewards of cleaning, then I feel happier. It just feels good. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That's pretty much the same for me. It's just like,
Yeah.
not having those things. There's some sort of like emotional or psychic or like, I don't know what to call it because I don't know what space it's filling in my head.
Yeah.
But there is some sort of space that these things are taking up, like maybe even just memory, right? Like the fact that I know that those headphones are in there and that I'm not going to use them
Yeah.
is like it's taking up some sort of space in my brain and in my house.
Yeah.
So whenever I'm able to get rid of those things, like you said,
Mhm.
like when I was moving and moving and moving and just kept getting rid of stuff every time I moved,
Yeah.
it felt so nice and freeing to just be like down to 2 totes of stuff. I'm back
Right.
above that again.
Yeah.
But and here's another thing I want to highlight, which is sometimes people take, like you were saying, minimalism to the most extreme
Yeah.
place of like, okay, here's my tiny home and exactly how much space I need and exactly the 2 outfits that I need and all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And while like that's great, totally works for some people, I
Yeah.
think a more general takeaway is just how you can sort of like downsize some things. Like I'm sure you've been to houses, or like I know multiple family members of mine
Mhm.
have houses where their garage is absolutely full of stuff that they
Mhm.
rarely use. They can't get their cars in.
Yeah.
Like, and it's just all this like clutter and junk. And not only is it that, it's actually preventing them from using something
Mhm.
that does have a use.
Right. Yeah, because you forget that you have it because it's like buried in a drawer somewhere. So when I was actually going through the process, I actually just did this a few weeks ago with my brother, and we went through every drawer. And I think, and I'll be curious to like how you would go about the process, but like some of the things that like my brother is way more minimalistic than I am, so it was helpful to have him here to support me in the process, because he's definitely achieved it in a better sense. But he still, he same as most people, he still has his struggles when we were doing his room. The other thing that tripped me up of being like, well, maybe I'll use it later, was the thing that tripped me up. But the other thing was like, but I spent so much money on this, and it's like it's going to take a lot of effort to try to sell it. But to donate it, it's just like, when I spent this much money, it's like that's another hard thing. But I haven't used it in like 2 years, so it's just like that could be another, I guess, trip up for sentimental things. Like what kinds of things like hold you back or kind of make it harder for you to give things up?
Well, I think there's sort of like it's a, how do I put it? Like a tiered list, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like you sort of work your way up, or at least that's for me the most useful way,
Mhm.
right? So like I started with, I know this doesn't quite answer your question, but I'll get to it eventually.
Yeah.
When I was doing it, I started with things that were that I had that were just like I hadn't used them in a long time
Mhm.
and they weren't very expensive
Yeah.
and they didn't have that much sentimental value, right? So it's like,
Right.
cool, like this is just trash. Like this is straight up just trash that I'm keeping. And you sort of mentioned this idea of like, oh, but I might need to use this later.
Right.
So that's what I started with, is like those
Mhm.
sort of things. And like I'm not gonna use this. And if I do need to, I'll buy a new one.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the first place I started. The
Mhm.
next thing I did was sort of stuff that I have multiples of. So for
Mhm.
example, I'm still not doing a good job or perfect job of this, but I have this microphone. I have another microphone that I'm never going to use again because
Mhm.
it's a huge pain to set up.
Mhm. That's the
That I
thing
need to
I
get
got
rid
rid
of.
of. Was the microphone that I spent a lot of money on, but it is a pain to set up, and I never use it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like the mental way to do it, at
Mhm.
least that works for me, is one of two things. I've had success doing like just sort of one item at a time, right? Just like,
Mhm.
okay, every day I'm going to get rid of something that I don't
Yeah.
that I don't need or
Mhm.
whatever. I've
Right.
also had success with the ripping the band-aid off version of just like, cool, Saturday, I'm getting rid of everything.
Yeah.
Both of those have worked for me.
Mhm.
But I do also think there's a point where if you have rational reasons to get rid of something and you're only keeping it for emotional reasons, then maybe there's like a little bit more wiggle room. But sometimes like you don't have any good reason to keep something and you still want to keep it. That's when I have to like tell myself like, okay, there's not like I can't listen to whatever this feeling is.
Right.
And I guess that's easier said than done.
Right.
But I've also gotten to the point of stuff like, oh, here's these journals, here's these other things, and realize like these take up space, but I want them. Like this is something that even though I don't visit often, it's still something that I'm going to want down the line. So I think also having some space or not going like overboard is also useful. But I would start with the things that are easier to like, this is for sure trash, this is blah blah blah. And as you go through that, I think it gets easier to see which of the other things you're like, no, I'm really never going to use this second microphone.
Yeah. Yeah. My microphone went to Goodwill. Hopefully someone's utilizing it and has the patience to set it up. But the other thing I just remembered that my brother had me get rid of was like I had all these empty printer ink cartridges that I'm like, oh, if I take it to Office Depot, they'll give me like $2 back for each cartridge, but I never got around to it. And so he was like, when are you actually going to do that? You're not. Throw it away. So I literally went in the trash. And then I feel bad because I'm like, well, I'm not being environmental about it. But at the same time, it's like, are you keeping it and waiting for like a right moment? When it's like, are you actually ever going to put in that effort to do that thing or not?
And if you're going to, is it worth the actual effort for the value, right? For example, I just went through a list of like mail and documents and like basically my desk to-dos.
Yeah.
And one of the things I got was a warranty sign up for the Keurig that we have down in the Airbnb. And I started, like I went to the website, I started typing it in from a giant form, massive. I started doing it and I was like, this thing was like $60. Like, if this breaks, I'm just going to get a new one. I'm not going to like, this is going to take me an hour to set this up. It's going to take 5 hours if I ever have to make a claim, like 6 hours, $60. It's like $10 an hour. Like that's not worth it to me. I don't want to do this anymore. So that's another way that I've found to sort of declutter some of my aspirational to-dos where like I think about it for a minute and I'm like, actually,
no. Taking
these cartridges in is like not worth the $6 that I'm gonna get back from it or $20 or whatever. Now I know like part of a lot of people's minimalist ideas are for environmental reasons, and that's a whole separate thing. If that's what's important to you, then like cool. But if you get to the point that it's not, then like I have a light bulb. There's a light bulb sitting there that I'm like, I shouldn't throw this in the trash. I should take this to the place it's supposed to go. It's been sitting there for 6 months probably now.
Yeah.
I should probably just throw that away too. In fact, after we're done talking, I'm going to like clean out my whole office.
Yeah, so it's like you have to think about the effort exerted to do things. Like if it's something you're like, well, I could sell this, and then you never put in the effort to do that, then it's just gonna sit there. And maybe you could sell it. And sometimes, if I'm not in a rush, it's like, okay, I have the space for it. Okay, I'm gonna like leave it up on the marketplace for a month. And if it doesn't sell, then it goes to Goodwill or something else. Oh, the other thing is, speaking of Goodwill, I just thought of, it's like generally I'm a fan of Goodwill, thrift shopping. I don't need things brand new. But if I am gonna go, because I don't go shopping that frequently for clothes, but when I do plan to, it's like, okay, let me go through my closet and get rid of some clothes that I don't wear anymore before I get more clothes, because that helps. I feel like I'm pretty decent with the clothes aspects. It's more the other stuff that although I do have relatively a lot more clothes than my husband or my brother. But I think for a female, I'm doing pretty good.
I think you touched on something important, which is when you like one of the things that can help release some of the emotional attachment to certain objects when you're thinking about selling them or giving them to Goodwill or whatever other thrift place, thinking about like giving your item a second life or a second home or like have it being in use somewhere else for a lot of people is the mindset that can like unlock actually getting rid of the thing.
Yeah.
And I because for most of these objects we're talking about decluttering or getting rid of, it's
Yeah.
stuff that's just sat there forever, like with no use.
Right.
So sometimes I just want to highlight sometimes like something that has some sentimental value but is also useful, but you're not using it and probably never will use it.
Yeah.
That can be one of the like ways to sort of unlock that and just like I'm giving it to a new home to have another life.
Another life. Yeah, actually, another reason why I like Goodwill is because it's like, well, you don't spend a lot on the items typically. So it's like it's easier to get rid of later if I decide like, actually I don't really like how this fits on me. It's easier. Or maybe, our bodies change and we don't fit into things. And so it's like, oh, well, I didn't spend like $400 on this item of clothing. So it's a lot easier to get rid of. If I don't fit into anymore than something that was that pricey. So, and it's like, if I'm going to spend like a lot of money on whether it's clothing, like my wedding dress or furniture, it's like, it's better be something I really like and don't see myself in the foreseeable future getting rid of. But then I end up getting like a lot of furniture. If it's cheap furniture from like the marketplace or Craigslist or something like that, then it just makes it easier to get rid of those types of things. Because it's like, well, I didn't spend a lot. It was more for function. And I don't have that need for that function anymore. So there it goes. Yeah.
On that note, being able to detach from things or like get rid of things on the smaller level helps open you up for one thing that I've seen people get really trapped by is feeling like a lot of their happiness is attached to certain possessions
Yeah.
and that they need to have like certain objects to feel happy. So, for example, like if let's just say my house burned down and I lost all the stuff inside of it. There are a few things I would be pretty sad about, but having been down to almost no items whatsoever,
Yeah.
I know that that's not even close to what's like it would the amount of time it would take me to recover emotionally from that is far shorter than it would be if I had never sort of done any of these practices or taken the time to like sort of release emotionally from some of my belongings and whatnot. Because now I know like there's a couple sentimental items. I'm just gonna have to remember those, but everything else pretty much I can just buy a new one, and maybe it won't exactly be the same one. But like these specific objects like are not the drivers of my happiness. But I just feel like other people can get like, or I've seen other people get so locked in on like, this doll or decoration or whatever broke, like it's broken, and like so upset about it for like weeks and weeks and weeks, or like a significant amount of time when it's just an object.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, I think that's a good question to ask people if they're trying to minimize stuff. It's like if your house was on fire, what would you grab before you run out of the house? And really like the only two things I thought of was like I really need my computer and my phone. That's about it. And it's like the clothes on maybe a few clothing items. But I'm like, well, clothes I'm not particularly attached to. Like I could always buy more clothes. So it's like whatever I'm wearing and maybe a few like pairs of underwear would be helpful and socks, things like that. But I'm like, I was even thinking about like, oh, photos, but most of my photos are on in the cloud. So it's like, I'm not going to lose those. It's like, even if my wedding album burned up, I'm like, could go back to Shutterfly and just order another one. That wouldn't be like the end of the world. Because I think it's still in there and I wouldn't even have to put in the work to redo it. or anything. Although there are some things like I still have some of my like yearbooks from from grade school and middle school and high school that, I mean, if I rarely look at them, but I do keep them around for sentimental values. But I'm like, I could probably find someone from my school if I really wanted to reminisce and look at my yearbooks potentially. But yeah, I feel like just my laptop and my phone are like the main things, because there's like so much on my computer that is important to like my work and my life. Yeah. But even then, I'm like, I could still replace it because a lot of things are in the cloud. So yeah, it wouldn't be the end of the world. Yeah.
And I feel like when you are intentional about like removing things, it just makes it easier when things get lost or taken or whatever unintentionally, right? Like when the world
Right.
takes them from you in some way.
Yeah.
It's I catch myself still being upset with stuff like, oh no, I like this shirt a lot and there's a rip in it or whatever else. I still catch myself doing that, but
Yeah.
again, the amount of time it takes for me to be like, it's just a shirt, like I'll just
Yeah.
get a different one. Like
Right.
I've had many favorite shirts in my life, and I'm sure I'll be fine without this one.
Yeah.
That shortening that sort of just like time period to recovery is so useful.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's like, really, if I was in a fire, I'd be like more about like, did everyone get out of the house okay, would be like the thing that would matter most than like the stuff that goes down, because you could always rebuild and get more stuff. But you can't replace people or dogs. Like dogs matter too. They would need to get them out too. Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't know. I feel like to me, I've always sort of had in my head that sort of mentality of like, oh, this stuff doesn't matter or whatever. But
Yeah.
only since I actually went through the process of getting rid of almost all my stuff has it felt, like emotionally manageable. Like
Yeah.
I would think it before, like, oh, I know it's important, but only when I was down to just like 2 totes of stuff in my car was I
Yeah.
like,
It's
oh no, I
important.
really feel it. Like I don't need
Mhm.
stuff. I do need money because I would like to stay somewhere and eat some things, but like
True.
I don't need a
Yeah.
lot of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I still need my like credit cards and ID and things like that. But actually, even like some of my biggest downsizes were moving across the country, because I've done that twice. I moved from Seattle to Maryland and then from Maryland to California. And I'm like looking back on those moves and I'm like, I got rid of a ton of stuff, a ton of furniture. But at the same time, I'm like, I brought my big, beautiful, like office desk that was huge, L shape. And it ended up being like, I still really like that desk, but it was really bulky and heavy, and it came in like a million pieces. So it like took forever to put together. And now I got rid of it eventually, as well as a few other items that I'm like, man, I could have saved so much space in the little thing, because I was just like attached to that particular desk. And now I have like just a simple like IKEA desk, which is just a like, and four legs, like the desk and the four legs, and it's pretty straightforward and it's totally functional. And so, yeah, I think it takes something to get rid of like some personal attachments, but you think about functionality, and I'm like, I really did not need it was taking up so much space. so, so yeah, I
And I
feel
think that's
happier with my simple IKEA cheap, $20 desk. Yeah.
I think that's a big part of what makes minimalism useful, or sort of like
Yeah.
getting rid of stuff or whatever else is not so much like, hey, here's hard and fast rules of all the things you have to keep or get rid of or whatever else. But it's more about like being very much more mindful and present to your relationships with like ownership of certain items.
Yeah.
And having that top of mind, I feel like gives you a lot more. I mean, you have the flexibility. It gives you a lot more just presence around making those sorts of choices.
Mhm.
Because I definitely have just held on to stuff or had stuff that when I'm not paying attention. Like I said, I pointed out like 4 or 5 things while we've been talking that I'm just like, I don't need these.
Probably
I haven't thought about that in forever. But now that I think about it and bring it top of mind, it's like, yeah, all this stuff needs to go.
Right. Yeah. So it can be a cleansing experience, and I think it can bring happiness for people if they kind of do the exercise, even though it might be challenging at times emotionally, or for other reasons. But I think it's a healthy process for people to practice. Yeah. All right. Any final thoughts before we wrap up for today?
I think that about covers it. Just, if you have some stuff to get rid of it.
Get rid of it. Yeah. Actually, I just looked at my desk and I have had this also expensive, fancy, like headphone that I spent like $300 on, because it's like noise proof, and I'm like, oh, I need to get rid of it, but I spent so much money on it, so I need to sell it. So I'm gonna put it on the marketplace by the end of the month, and if it doesn't sell, it's so hard. So hard. If it doesn't sell within a month, that'll be really hard to get rid of. But or maybe I'll post it on eBay. I think that'll get more hits. So that's on my to-do list now. Yeah, because it's been sitting there for a while. All right, well, that's it for today. Thank you everyone for tuning in this week. We appreciate you, and if you appreciate us, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and help spread the happiness in the world. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please take a second to subscribe, as it really helps out a lot. If you're looking for more content, there's all sorts of information over at howtohappy.com, and if you want something a little bit more condensed and concise, I've also written the book Mindscaping, which is essentially a framework for optimizing happiness. So we'll have the link there as well, and that's all I've got. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.